Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was accosted on the steps of the Capitol earlier today. Now, according to reports from reporters who were at the scene, who watched this unfold, Representative Ted Yoho was coming down the steps on the east side of the Capitol, having just voted, when he approached AOC. She was, of course, getting into the building to cast a vote for her of her own, and they, well, ran into each other and had a rather testy exchange that was overheard by this reporter. Yoho told Cortez that she was, quote, disgusting. Oh, great. So, yeah, what happened to that civility, right? Oh, doesn't exist because it's literally just a way to try to clamp down on the left. So now, in the context of this, right, he said that she was disgusting for suggesting that poverty and unemployment were driving a spike in crime in New York City during the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, so now wait a minute. Let me give you some additional context into this. So this goes back to one of her recent town halls. She suggested that some of the surge in crime stems from economic hardship facing New York's poorest communities. So now, some of New York has also seen an increase in gun crime, in shootings, right? So now, the right wing says, well, that doesn't have anything to do with poor people, right? Then why are people shooting each other? I mean, it's not like they're, going and stealing a loaf of bread or anything like that. No, they're shooting each other. Well, that was one of the things that the right took out of context. And so what she actually did say is that, look, crime is a problem of a diseased society, which neglects its marginalized people. Policing is not the solution to crime. So look, I mean, she's right? When you get into, the nuance, when you actually try to have a real discussion without, political agendas, you get into a discussion about, okay, you've got crimes of despair, right? Generally, people don't do crime because they like crime. Yeah, sure, some people do. All right. But for the rest of people, I think there's normally an underlying reason. And some of those reasons, some of those factors that do lead to some crime are legitimate. Again, you've got poverty. And by the way, I'm not saying that the crimes themselves are legitimate. I'm just saying the reasons are understandable. Like, okay, I get it. You shouldn't do that. And maybe we should have programs to alleviate those factors, which is what AOC was saying. But you can understand, like, somebody who's poor, who can't afford food, can't afford their rent, will go and steal. I get it. It, again, doesn't make it right, doesn't make it just. But you have to understand that those factors are there. And we should have a government that is able to actually help those people. And look, you could also have, theft being a result of mental illness, which is also, again, something that we could use government spending, government resources to be able to help that person manage that mental illness. So all of that stuff, right? So now, that said, if you grow up in a disadvantaged area, and I don't remember who was talking about this, it might have been Vaush, right? So he was talking about the 1350, right? That gets talked about by conservatives a lot. How black people tend to do more crime, right? That's what conservatives are saying, and actually, with the numbers kind of panned out. Well, there's reasons for that. Okay, growing up in a disadvantaged area, the inner city with not a lot of job opportunity, what's the only way that you can provide for your family in some of those situations? Well, you join a gang. Now, gang violence is a huge problem. It's probably what's driving a lot of these shootings. But, you have that situation where you either make minimum wage working at McDonald's, right? Or make a lot more money dealing drugs. I mean, if your goal is to take care of your family and to get money, well, the choice for some people would be obvious. And so again, we can do something to alleviate those issues. We can do something to help to reduce that level of crime and actually make the choices for people in those communities a lot better. Because not everybody who does it necessarily wants to get mixed up into that and might not have a choice. But again, these are very nuanced discussions, and I can understand that there are some people that are not interested in a nuanced discussion, that are interested in writing off large swaths of especially the African American population as just thugs, criminals that are unable to be redeemed whatsoever. In actuality, of course, human beings are very complex people, and with very complex motivations, or even sometimes simple motivations, wanting to survive. Anyway, Ocasio-Cortez again went on to propose that economic desperation caused by coronavirus, which is also another thing with 42 million people out of work, millions more that are facing in October, about 21 million people, or it's 21 to 23 million people that face possibly eviction by October if there is no more coronavirus relief. If we allow those benefits in unemployment to end at the end of July, and don't do any sort of recurring UBI payment or do any sort of rent cancellation or freezing, something like that, in order to help them, then we're going to face a massive, massive eviction problem, homelessness problem. And that is looming on the horizon, and we can actually do something about it. And so she was saying that. Now, she also added that there were glitches in the delivery of federal stimulus checks, as we've seen, unemployment payments that has helped trigger crime. And so she said maybe this has to do with the fact that people aren't paying their rent and they're scared to pay their rent. And so they go out and they need to feed their child and they don't have the money. So they're put in a position where they feel like they either need to shoplift some bread or go hungry that night. Again, nothing to do with violent crime. So there's nothing to do with like the shootings, actually the violent stuff there. And so, again, they did take her out of context. All right. And again, I can see that. Again, that's not always the case. Again, nuance here, right? But she's right that you could alleviate at least a decent chunk of crime in an area if you go after the underlying causes of it. As for police, look, technically police aren't there to stop crime. I mean, the whole point of the cops is to catch people before or even sometimes during a crime, right? And the crimes they generally intervene in are usually traffic related. If there's a murder, then the cops generally didn't, prevent that, right? How could they have known that a murder was going to happen? They can't. Their job afterwards is to investigate, to find the people responsible, and get them off the street and into the justice system. Nobody's opposed to police playing that role and helping to keep the peace. What we are opposed to when it comes to police, and this is where defund the police comes into play, is, hey, maybe we should, instead of, funding the police to such an extent that we are doing right now, we should take some of that money and redirect it to things like education, job investment, opportunities, rehabilitation, mental health care, social work, and other things like that. Dealing with those things, dealing with mentally ill people, for example, are kind of above the cops' pay grade. They don't know what to do. They're not trained well in that situation. They shouldn't be asked to deal with that. And before somebody asks, well, how's a social worker supposed to restrain somebody that could be acting violent who's mentally ill? Well, let me tell you, workers do it all the time. Home healthcare workers, direct support professionals do it all the time in behavior in homes where people do sometimes violent behaviors. They're not allowed to kill their patients. No, if they do, they get blackballed from the industry. And they have to deal with all sorts of negative, violent, sometimes dangerous behaviors. They don't get a gun. I'm just saying, and they shouldn't. So why should cops deal with that when they're not trained? Right now, the cops take on way too much than we actually pay them for, than they actually should be doing, when they should just be there to keep the peace. And that's it. So now, all that aside, right? Back to AOC. So they're on the Capitol steps, and he calls her disgusting, and then adds, "You're out of your freaking mind." So her response was, "Well, you're being awfully rude," right? Now the two then parted ways. AOC headed into the building while Yoho, joined by Representative Roger Williams of Texas, began descending towards the House office buildings a few steps down. Yoho said this, quote, "Fucking bitch." Well, you're classy. What a classy guy. Now, after it happened, AOC did talk to reporters about it, because there was a reporter there, and said that kind of confrontation hasn't ever happened to me, ever. I've never had that kind of abrupt, disgusting kind of disrespect levied at me. Well, what do you expect from Republicans? Honestly. Approached a few hours later, Yoho had, quote, "no comment." Because, of course. Williams, who was in a position to hear the entire back and forth, said he wasn't paying attention, and he had this excuse. Quote, "I was actually thinking as I was walking down the stairs, I was thinking about some issues I've got in my district that need to get done. I don't know what their topic was. There's always a topic, isn't there?" The reason I do that stupid voice is that is a condescending, glib response. Total bullshit. To which, of course, AOC on Twitter later on said this, "Gotta love Republican courage from Representative Roger Williams. When he undeniably sees another man engaged in virulent harassment of a young woman, just pretend you never saw it in the most cartoonish manner possible and keep pushing." By the way, she adds, "He's lying. He joined in with Yoho." So now it wasn't just Yoho. One Republican. It was two of them. Apparently, she, according to AOC, he was yelling at her as well about something about throwing urine. I don't know what the context of that conversation was, but wow. Blatantly lying to the reporter about who even saw this exchange, just lying to people. Any surprise, right? Any surprise? I mean, a conservative verbally accosting a fellow, it's supposed to be a colleague, right? On the steps, and then lying about it. Say it ain't so. This happens to, of course, be a young woman. But again, she's been a target for quite some time, even though she actually didn't expect this kind of this kind of thing from a fellow member of Congress. She said, "In all these intense news cycles, I have never, ever been treated that way by another member before. I am frankly quite taken aback." She also said that she holds her differences until they get to the door, right? And that's, of course, when they go into actually have substantive arguments, or supposed to have substantive arguments on the issues. She also did add in a tweet, "But bitches get things done." Look, I think this is, again, I'm not surprised, right? I believe this is how the base wants their politicians to act. Because that's how they act. They constantly scream in people's face, belittle women, call them names, right? I mean, how much would you bet this wouldn't have happened if it were a male politician in AOCC? I mean, I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty safe to say that I would win that bet. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.